In this video section, we're going to model a process for giving feedback, which is one of the most impactful tools for co-founders to do as a regular practice, both to build trust with one another, to manage expectations and communicate clearly, and as well as to work through past miscommunications in order to become more aligned in their partnership. What I like to offer is a very specific prompt that has a lot of powerful components to it that makes this successful to use as a regular practice. So that prompt is, when you did X specific and recent action, I felt Y emotion, and the story I tell myself is Z. Is that correct? Now, part of the benefit of this approach is that both the specific action and the emotion that was felt are observable, and therefore they're facts that you can speak to clearly, not assumptions. And then the story I tell myself is what you think the person was thinking when they did that action, but you're recognizing you don't know and you want to check in on that. Finally, as quick tips here, when you're doing this as a regular practice with your co-founder, I suggest that you pick something that's a 10 to 15% risk, rather than jumping into an area, if possible, that's going to be very challenging and confronting in order to build this muscle. Pick something that's recent so that both people can recall that situation. Bottom line, a really core skill, which means trust in the conversation. Not everything needs to be said up front. Say less so that the other person can digest it and you can engage with it. And finally, some elements that are helpful, but maybe take more practice to get really well honed, are setting an intention for why you're having the conversation that sort of acts as an umbrella for why you want to bring something up. And finally, listen for the other person's needs in the conversation, because that can unlock a lot of insight about how to solve this feedback at a interpersonal level, rather than just getting at the quick fix solution. With all that in mind, excited to be here with Paul, who is both someone who I have learned a tremendous amount from about communication and this very skill of feedback, and someone who over the last few years have worked together on a project that is a retreat project. And so we have a lot of working experience and have had to be in the practice of giving each other feedback. Thanks for joining, Paul.
I am very happy to support you making this cool episode of your Syncs series.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, what we'll do now is just to play out some feedback that was alive for us at one point. And in this case, this was some feedback that I think really strengthened our partnership in some interesting ways. And so why don't you kick us off?
So, Nathan, I want to give you some feedback because I'm noticing I'm having some reactions and some feelings, and I worry that if maybe I just go with that, it's going to work against continuing to strengthen our relationship. And the project that we're doing together is very, very, very dear to my heart. And so I don't want to undermine it if possible. How's that sound?
That sounds good. Thank you.
So after we did that gig in the city, where we got a bunch of new people to participate in our work in a different format than our regular extended weekend format, I had already communicated some with our contact person there about a follow-up, but I didn't send something out yet to the people who participated. And then I saw that you sent something out to them. I had not been communicated with. You had not communicated with me about doing that. I felt, I think, angry, but mostly scared and confused. And I guess the story I made up was that it sounds silly, but I'm not important.
Thank you, first and foremost. And I join you in what I heard you say was that you're passionate about this work that we're doing. And so there was a choice that could have, let this go by, but that it felt important to share. And so I appreciate that. And I think what I'm heard in I just want to clarify. So basically, I know the event. Obviously, we just did this event in the city, and there was a sense of something that would be communicated. I know that, I had sent that on my own and without sort of finalizing between us what that communication would specifically say. And then what I heard you say is that you felt angry, but also some fear, and that the worry was around, and the story was around not being felt as important in that moment. Is that correct?
Yes. Thank you for letting all
Yeah.
that in.
Well, I'm noticing a little bit of tightness for me. And so I read that as importance and wanting to get things correct, and so to work through this. And I was aware when sending that, we had built up a pattern where normally we would sync on things. And in this particular case, I was choosing not to, and that there might be some risk to that. In regards to your story of not being important, that was not my reason for not including in this case. It was, and so I want to acknowledge that very much important to the project and our work. In that case, I've been feeling my life being quite busy, and there was a sense of, can we move more quickly? And we've had this norm of doing things together on each step, but in this case, I knew I was pushing a little bit of an edge, but it was also something that I guess I wanted to do, and I didn't communicate it, but just thought, oh, we have enough trust that I can do this, and we'll I think, we'll be okay. And so that was where I was at.
Thank you. I'm hearing that you did make that choice intentionally, and that you did that for the value around expediency and effectiveness and efficacy, and like not taking as much time as it would have taken in up to that point. Our norm had been pretty much like every relatively small step had some degree of contact, verbal time spent, you and me. And so you were valuing saying, I'm busy, this needs to go forward. But I'm always also hearing that you did have some trust in our relationship from that prior amount of investment, which shows up in part by those little conversations that we had. So I am taking that, and that feels, when I hear that you value the expediency, I have a sense of recognition and respect, and wanting to honor that for both of our lives. That makes sense to me. But I think hearing the piece where you say that you partially made that call out of some degree of trust in the relationship, I feel myself calming down considerably from my fear. This thing, it's pretty rational, right? I mean, on a feeling level, am I important? Sometimes that doesn't map all the way onto each action, but a specific action can bring it up. And even as I'm just sitting here in this conversation with you now, I'm kind of recognizing that I do have some value about being included. And, it even has to do with my early days. I was a gender non-conforming little boy who got a lot of messages about I didn't belong. And so it's, I get it, that's about me, but it's also really important for me to be clear about that so that you can honor that in a way that we can work together to make it still honor your values around moving forward and being expedient, because you're busy, and I get that.
I'm feeling some intenseness that had been there, but also some relief. So kind of that shift, both in, just I really badly want you to know that you are included, and that we are full partners and work very. I wouldn't be doing this work without your support, and so that was something that I didn't want to not be included in any shift or action, and to but also to hear you kind of create space for that my hope for efficiency, that there's some way, how do we get there, feels exciting, because it makes me feel energized as well, that's being supported. And then yes, I am aware, like I'm hearing the notion of being included that shows up in different ways at different moments, and that was what was sort of made this important to tap into and to explore. And I want to make sure that is something I hear more clearly now, I guess, as we work through this, that's quite important, which I know, but also I'm feeling it in a new way, I guess,
Mhm.
in our conversations, and wanting to make sure that I'm thinking very thoughtfully about that piece of our partnership.
Okay, so I want to pause and end part one of that feedback session between Paul and I to do a quick rehash of some of the skills employed and how that shifted the dynamic and then the results of the conversation. It's worth noting that Paul is a senior facilitator for the Stanford Business School's interpersonal dynamics work, which is a leading program on teaching how to communicate in complex group scenarios. So a highly skillful practitioner of communication and communicating at different levels and bringing in different insights to have an effective conversation. And the point in saying all of that is both that there's some powerful skills in how he communicates. I know this from my work with him, and that I want to set the bar that as a co-founder, when I was running my company, I was very far away from doing any of these things, and that was causing frustration in conversations. And you don't need to become an expert. You can 80-20 this by learning some of the basic tips and skills in this feedback process, and then also just setting an intention to practice it and to you with the motivation that getting better at this process will make you a better leader and a better co-founder. So reflecting on the conversation that happened to date, one of the things that happened at the very onset was this intermediate tip of sharing an intention that creates a high level umbrella for why it's important to have the conversation, important to take time to have it, and also makes it less about the specific facts of the situation and more about something bigger. Paul did this in naming, I could have let this go, but I value our partnership, so I want to bring it up. And it says the reason why we're going to have this hard conversation is because it actually matters. And it sets the tone of this is about the partnership, not so much that one-off situation. Other elements in here, recent example, so identifying that this was feedback from a recent, something that I did following up an event that we had done recently, and there's a window in which is most effective to bring up the topic. Did that well, 10 to 15%. As I recall this situation, and this was a live example that we worked through that had it's worth highlighting, it had a very beneficial impact on our collaboration because we successfully worked through something, and therefore we could change our norms and emerge without undermining trust in our partnership. It was in that 10 to 15% risk zone that we had built up trust by working together for a while. And so that gave leeway to take risks. And that is a key element that, at different stages of your partnership, there's more foundation to use to then keep stretching. And I think that's a useful process overall. Lastly, you might have seen sort of that those naming of needs, need for inclusion, and need for efficiency. A lot of partnerships can get stuck when you have different needs and you're saying, oh, here's my feedback for you, but like you might not want to listen to your partner's feedback because you have a different need. And that when you're able to be empathetic, hear the other person's need, state your own, they're able to hear that. You can think creatively. So how does the need for inclusion get met without impinging as my life was getting busier, a need for efficiency? And it might be, maybe just having a conversation actually meets that. Or maybe it's a quick pre-email sent before something goes out that helps just kind of reiterate the awareness and the attention to the need for inclusion. I'll also note, throughout, Paul was doing a very good job of supporting my needs. So making that feel heard, which then makes it easier to really calm down and hear each other, hear his needs. And I think throughout there was a good amount of bottom lining. There's always choices to include more, say more, but clarity is really important. And so even if it's something that is hard to say, being clear about it and saying it and stopping so it gets heard by the other person is valuable, and all those things were alive in this example. So I hope it was helpful for you. And really at the most basic level, just simply using this net model is what it's called at the very top here. When you did X specific action, I felt Y emotion. The story I tell myself is Z assumption. Is that correct? Has a huge impact on having a more successful conversation that's getting at the heart of what is going wrong rather than just talking over the issue. So again, hope this is helpful. There's a part 2 with a little bit that carries the conversation to some next deeper levels that you might also find interesting. Thanks so much for listening.